Hey guys, LC Holt here, and this is my update for the week of April the 8th. Now, as you know, I've been away for a little while, about a month. Unfortunately, it was not something I could control, so apologies, but we're back now. We got a whole slew of new shows coming your way, including today's show, which is going to be about the Golden State Killer. Joining me today, as always, when we do these sorts of crazy true crime type broadcasts, is Zach Myers. Zach, how you doing today, buddy?
Hey, what's up, LC? Long time no see.
I know, it's been a minute. Like, my hair's grown out and everything. It's nuts.
Yeah, but man, we have a great chat for everyone because this is a really interesting subject. A recently caught serial killer.
That's right. And we're going to jump into it. So, you ready?
Let's do it, man.
Okay, Goleta, California, October 1st, 1979. We got an unnamed couple sleeping in their bedroom at night. They're unnamed because, well, I'll get to that in a second. But they're sleeping in their bedroom. Somebody comes in with a flashlight pointed in their face, wakes them up. This guy's got a bunch of pre-cut ligatures. He has the girl tie up her boyfriend or husband. We're not quite sure, but I think it was her husband. And then he ties her up, right? And so what happens is he separates them. The intruder takes the woman tied up, ankles tied tightly, and her hands behind her back, takes her into the living room, leaves the guy tied up very similarly in the bedroom. So the girl is trying to get her hands free, and she hears this intruder walking back and forth down the hall, saying to himself, "I'm going to kill him. I'm going to kill him. I'm going to kill him." And so, realizing that she's in deep shit, she manages to get her wrists untied somehow. And she goes hopping right out the front door. The intruder realizes this has happened, and he runs out after her with a knife in his hand. He puts the knife to her throat, and he tells her, "I told you shouldn't move," drags her back into the house. Right about that time, her husband, who is also still bound, has gotten up out of the bedroom and out the back door, right? So this guy's like, "Oh shit, what's going on?" The intruder, he runs out the back into the backyard and is searching for this guy who's still tied up somewhere in the backyard. He gets close to where the guy is hiding, and he realizes that the woman has back out in the front, and now she's screaming, which is probably what she should have done the first time, but, extreme circumstances, right? So he realizes, I've lost total control, and he takes off. He jumps on a bike and takes off. So this couple, who is unnamed because they were not murdered, that's why their names were not released, managed to survive this attack. They actually were very, very fortunate that they had the presence of mind to do what they did in the situation. Because as we're about to find out, this same attacker turned out to be very vicious, and he did not make the same mistake again. Okay, so now we'll jump ahead. Also in Goleta, California, this is December 30th, the same year, 1979. You got a doctor named Robert Offerman and his girlfriend, who's 10 years younger, a girl named Deborah Manning, okay? We're not quite sure what happened in this situation. The intruder got into the house. It appears that Dr. Offerman somehow got loose of his bindings. They were both tied up, just like in the earlier case. The doctor gets loose and lunges at the attacker, right? And he's shot dead. Now, the woman is raped and murdered, okay? The neighbors heard gunshots, but they didn't report them. So when the bodies were found, it was a little while later, and the cops discovered there were actually paw prints of a dog in the house. Now, Offerman did not own a dog. So, did the killer bring his own dog? It would appear so. Now, this was the second incident. Now, the next thing happened in Ventura, California. That's in Ventura County, March 13th, 1980. Charlene and Lyman Smith. This is kind of an interesting case. Lyman Smith was an attorney, and he was about to be appointed as a judge to the California Supreme Court. Okay. He has a 12-year-old son. The 12-year-old son mows his yard. So the son comes over one day and goes into the house looking for his father. And he walks into the bedroom and he finds that his father and her new wife, not his mother, it would be his stepmother, who is 10 years younger than Lyman Smith, Charlene is the wife's name, are bound on the bed with drapery cord. And there are little pieces of a log on the floor. And both of these people have been beaten to death with a log. And the wife was raped. Very brutal. I mean, their heads were pretty much smashed in. So it was a crime apparently of passion, and that's what the police thought at first. And in fact, this crime, unlike the other two, had a suspect, a guy named Joe Alsep. Okay, he was a former business partner of Lyman Smith, and they apparently had some bad blood between them. Alsep, his fingerprint was found on a glass in the house the night of the murder. And on top of that, his minister at the church he attended apparently said that he had confessed to him that he'd murdered his former business partner and the wife. There was also another possible suspect because Charlene had a boyfriend, and she'd had a boyfriend for a long time. So the cops kind of went down that avenue as well. But unlike the boyfriend of Charlene, Mr. Alsip was actually charged with the murder based on the minister's statement that he had confessed. The only problem was it later came out that the minister kind of exaggerated Alsip's guilt, because I think Alsip kind of just felt guilty that he was somehow responsible for this, but he didn't really confess, and the minister sort of said that he did. So the moral of this story is be careful what you confess to your minister because he might blow it. He might blow it wildly out of proportion, right? So Alsip was set free. And so that, like I said, that was in March of 1980. If we speed it ahead to August of the same year, another married couple, a young couple named Keith and Patrice Harrington. Okay, she's a nurse. He is a medical student at UC Irvine. This is in Dana Point, California now. So we're not in Ventura anymore. An intruder comes in through a bedroom window that they left ajar. And you can probably guess what happened. He bludgeoned them both to death, and he raped Patrice. Now, they were not found for 2 days, and they were found by Keith's father. Like I say, 2 days later, and then Keith's father called Keith's brother, and the cops were there by the time the brother Bruce arrived on the scene, and it was clear that, you know, they were beyond saving. But anyway, there was no real suspects in that case because the couple, like I say, were young. They were starting out their lives. They had no known enemies. So again, it's a very mysterious crime, but you can see the MO starting to form here.
Yeah.
So we have to go, this is in Irvine, also very near the Dana Point crime, the previous crime. There was a woman named Manuela Whithune, okay, February 6th of 1981. So you can see there are slight gaps between these crimes. She was a 28-year-old married woman. She was home alone at the time. Not quite sure what happened. We know that an intruder got into the house somehow, raped and murdered her while she was there by herself, and then she was found later. An interesting detail about Manuela Whithune is that her television set was taken out into the backyard where there was like a privacy fence, and it was sat down next to the privacy fence. And so it was either the intruder tried to make it look like a botched robbery, or he might have been boosting himself to get over the privacy fence by standing on top of this television set, or it could have been a combination of both. But either way,
I think he was making it. I think he was setting it up to look like a fake robbery. Because I mean, honestly, like if all the things you're gonna find to boost yourself up, you're gonna just grab a television.
Yeah, I mean, it seems like you just grab, like a chair. But no, he took her television, and I think you have a good point there. He probably did use it to make the cops believe he was a burglar, and because he did seem to like to know to throw the cops off and to do things that made them think one thing when it was actually something else. And we'll get into that more later. But so that was Manuela. We have to move ahead now to July 27th, 1981. I was officially 3 days old, Zach, when this happened. And what happened was Sherry Domingo and Gregory Sanchez. Sherry's relative, one of her relatives, not quite sure what, couldn't find that, had died, and she was living in their home at the time, I assume until, the estate sold it. An intruder entered through a bathroom window. Gregory was not tied up. So what it seemed like happened perhaps was that Gregory caught the intruder when he was coming in. But what happened was Gregory got shot in the face, right in the cheek. And then he was beaten to death with some sort of a gardening tool.
Gee.
So it's another one of those instances where the guy seemed to be protecting, his girl, and just was one up by somebody who had a weapon, and he didn't have one. But you can probably guess what happened to Sherry. She was bludgeoned to death and raped. Now, there was no rope found. And this seemed to be the case on several of these incidents. The women were clearly tied up. There were ligature marks on the body, but there was no rope, nor murder weapon, which meant that the attacker took it with them after he murdered them, which is kind of an important detail because that's another thing that starts to link all these things together. Now, keep in mind, these things are not being linked together necessarily at the time. This is the third crime in Goleta, but the other two were in different. There were two in Irvine, and then there was the one in Ventura. So this is kind of getting spread out, but it's in the same general area, but different police jurisdictions.
Okay.
Also, there were paint chips found, which led some of the investigators to think that maybe the attacker was a painter of some kind. Maybe he painted cars or houses. But there were evidence of paint chips at the crime. Now, if you go ahead, May 4th of 1986. Now, remember, that crime was 3 days after my birthday, July 27th, 1981, right? So 5 years later, in May of 1986, there's a very young girl, 18 years old, in Irvine, back in Irvine now. So this is the third Irvine case. And she's home alone because her parents are vacationing in Mexico. Her name is Janelle Cruz. Okay, someone gets into her house, they beat her to death, and they rape her and they beat her with a pipe wrench, actually. Now, there were no ropes found in this scene either. So that's one of the pieces of evidence that ties it to the earlier cases, even though there's been 5-year gap. And kind of like the case I was telling you about before, where there was a suspect, there was a suspect in this case that the police liked because Janelle had a young teenage admirer who told them that I hadn't seen her the night of her death. And come to find out, he was at the house that night.
Oh, okay.
So whenever you lie to the police and there's been a murder in the house of your girlfriend, it makes you look bad.
Oh,
you know?
yeah.
The kid probably would have been a lot better off just saying, yeah, I was visiting my girl and then I left, but she was alive when I left, but he didn't do that. So there were some known characteristics about this killer. They knew he was a white male, right? They assumed he had a physical, athletic build because he's climbing fences and riding off on bicycles and stuff. He had a type A blood, and they think he had you know, they had sort of a rough physical thing, like they thought he had light brown hair, but not a lot of people had seen him and survived other than the first couple and Goleta that was unnamed, but they were, you know, he was wearing a balaclava at that time, you know, like a ski mask.
Oh,
so
okay.
they're pretty sure he had blue eyes, but, you know, it was nighttime. He's wearing a ski mask. They weren't 100% sure.
It's hard to tell.
It is hard to tell. Now, do you know what they called this killer in the press?
The ear, right?
They called him the original Night Stalker.
Oh, the original Night Stalker, yes.
Well, actually, they didn't call him the original Night Stalker because Richard Ramirez wasn't around yet, but they called him the Night Stalker. And then later, Richard Ramirez came along and stole his name, and so now they call him the original Night Stalker. But he was known as the Night Stalker. And for obvious reasons, he prowled their houses and broke in the night using open windows or windows that he could easily pry open. And he came into their room and caught them. You know, he'd always kind of catch them when they're in bed, off guard, and then attack them. Now, for years, they didn't really know who this guy was. All their good suspects were eliminated, like the teenage boy, like the business partner of Lyman Smith. But this guy was a rapist. So they had rape kits. And in those rape kits, they had his DNA. And eventually, they managed to match his DNA with an earlier crime spree that happened in Sacramento. Now, have you ever heard of the East Area Rapist?
Yes.
Who hasn't heard of the East Area Rapist, right? Now, you have to go back, beginning in June of 1976, okay? This guy started to break into the houses, originally at first of single women with no children. And usually it was a one-story house. Later, he started to break into houses where women had children. And then after that, he actually started to break into houses where there were couples, where a man was present. Okay. The MO that they were managed to put together about this guy is that he stalked his victims for a long period of time before he attacked them. In fact, a lot of these people who were attacked had reported prowlers on their property prior to their attack. So what they believe is that this guy, the East Area Rapist, would go around and prowl on his victims for many, many nights, long periods of time, and watch them. And that was somehow a part of his sort of foreplay, you know. And there was even some instances where he would break into the house before he attacked, like a day or two before. And he would open windows, he would unload guns, he would plant pre-cut strips of rope and shoelaces in the house. And then he would leave. And then he would come back and attack, and his stuff would just be there hidden in the house, and he'd just have it with him. He didn't have to bring it. So this is a very kind of organized perpetrator, this prowler, this East Area Rapist. He had an MO which will sound familiar based upon the later crimes, which are now linked to him. He would come in the night. He would have a flashlight. He'd wake them up with a flashlight in their eyes. He would have pre-cut rope or shoelaces, and he'd tie them up, their wrists and their ankles. He would usually use a towel or a sheet or something, tear those into strips, gag the person or people if they were children, and then later the men. And you know, and then of course he's the East Area Rapist, so he would rape these women. Okay. So what he kind of did usually, his MO when the children were there, is he would separate them, and he would tell the mother, you know, I'm going to kill your kid, or, you know, and so he had a violent streak, this East Area Rapist, and he had like knives and stuff, but he wasn't a killer at this point. Obviously later he graduated to being a killer, but something he would do as well with the men when there were men present. And this is kind of an unusual detail, is he'd go into the, and this is another thing that linked all these rapes together, is he would go into the kitchen and he'd get a cup and saucer. And after he took the woman out of the room to be violated, he would put the cup and saucer on the back of the man. And he would say, if I hear this cup rattle or break, I'm going to kill her. And so the man would have to lay there perfectly still for fear that he would be the cause of his wife or girlfriend's murder. Pretty terrifying stuff, wouldn't you say, Zach?
Yes, yes, it is. And it's actually pretty, not to give him credit for, but it's pretty clever.
Well, and he was a sadistic bastard, this East Area rapist, because sometimes he would untie the lady, or at least leave her, like her legs or her hands, unbound, and then he'd go hide in the house, and she'd think he was gone. And then he would come, and when she would try and get up or move, he would jump out at her to scare her and then rape her again. So he liked to instill fear in people and terrify them. It wasn't just about the sexual side of it, but obviously probably this was some sort of an arousing thing for him, their terror and their helplessness.
Yeah.
50 women were raped between June of 1976 and the early part of 1979 in the Sacramento area. All of these were tied to the East Area Rapist. Now, the thing about it is there were a lot of interesting, like kind of weird things that happened. Like these victims were not just victimized once. He would often call them and leave messages on their machine or talk to them personally and tell them that he was going to come back for them and kill them and all this. So again, it goes back to this weird fetish he had for terrifying people. Now, probably one of the strangest details in this was that the police had a town hall meeting, and they got the entire community together to discuss this East Area Rapist situation, because 50 women in that amount of time that we know about, because there probably are a lot that we don't know about, because there is unfortunately an element to rape where not everybody's going to say what happened to them, and it's sort of understandable why they don't. It's sad, but that's just kind of the case. But back to this town hall meeting, the police wanted to get everybody together and tell them what they were doing with the case, and reassure them. So, what do you think of that town hall situation?
Yes, I actually know a little about that town hall meeting. It's pretty interesting but terrifying. Well, when everybody was kind of yelling and getting together at the town meeting and about this killer, about how they're going to capture him, one individual stood up, and people reported, because everybody around him heard him say it, that somebody should grab the killer and torture, and tie him up and torture his wife and see how he would like it. And about I'm gonna say about a little less than a week later, the killer the rapist broke into their home, the same man, tied him up and raped his wife and murdered them both. Now, this guy doesn't like to be challenged at all. The moment that, because in the papers, they would say, okay, well, he would only attack if a man wasn't present. Kind of trying to warn women, try to have a man in the house, maybe he won't come. He felt challenged by that, so then he would attack if a man was present. So this guy talking crap. Now, what made everybody really scared is there's no way this killer would have known this if he wasn't in the fucking meeting with everyone else. So yes, everyone was among evil without knowing about it. And he was sitting there listening, very quietly to everything this guy was saying about him, biting his tongue, and attacked him.
And he was probably getting quite a thrill out of sitting there listening to all this attention, because it's like we've talked about other serial killers on this show, and one thing that seems to really turn them on, no matter what their predilation is they love attention,
Oh yeah.
And so you imagine that this East Area rapist is sitting at this meeting, and you have the police, and they're making a big deal about it, and all the people around him are terrified. And, I think the guy standing up and making a show of that, and then he just probably couldn't resist,
Oh yeah.
because as we know, this guy loves controlling people. That sense of control, and it's interesting too, because you can see the escalation, because you got this guy who starts with women alone. And as you said, every time, I think it goes back to the serial killer thing of they have a fantasy and then they bring that fantasy to life and then they've done it. So the thrill is lost a lot of the time. So then you have to escalate.
Yeah.
And with this guy, you can see this very clear escalation from one thing into another, into, from women to women with children.
I've heard several serial killers say the same thing. I don't want to go into detail because it'll kind of be off subject, but I've heard several serial killers say the same thing where they start off very minor, if it's just watching people or, like watching people through the window, or if it's just minor home invasion, or just little stuff like that. And it can go from just at the end, it can go to full on butchering people, and it does escalate over time because a lot of them do get bored, and like you were saying, and this guy is no different.
And speaking of escalation, sort of the end of what was known as the East Area rapes was punctuated on February the 2nd of 1978, when there was a couple walking their dog very close to where 5 of these rapes had taken place. And, the man was a military police officer, and he was there with his wife. They were both young. And apparently they saw a prowler trying to get into a house. And the man, being a military police officer, tried to intervene in the situation. And the guy took off. And so this young man took off 1 foot after him and chased him down, chased him through all these backyards until it was very clear that this intruder, or this potential intruder, was not going to get away. So the guy jumped him, and there was a struggle, and the East Area rapist had a gun on him and shot him.
Wow.
And not only did he shoot him, but he went back to where the wife was waiting in the street, and he shot her and killed her.
Jeez.
Now, I would think probably the reason he killed both of them, well, I mean, the man was chasing him, but the reason he killed the wife, I would assume, was because he probably wasn't wearing a mask or anything, so she might have saw his face. So he went ahead, after he killed the husband, he went back and killed the wife. So here you have a very clear escalation from these series of 50+ rapes to a murder of a man and a woman right there on the street walking their dog. And then you jump ahead, and that's when you get into the crime spree of the original Night Stalker, which is how I opened the show, talking about that. So, again, you can see the stairwell this guy's walking up, and how it's getting more and more brutal and vicious, and he's getting more and more dangerous. Now, you got to kind of go ahead many, many years to 2018. They have the DNA profile of the East Area rapist, who they now know is the same person who later became known as the original Night Stalker. One and the same. They had this, and they were able, using these ancestral databases, to put that DNA profile into a computer. And what happened is they actually got a hit on the East Area Rapist / original Night Stalker. And they had a suspect. But, you know, the ancestral thing just links you to relatives. So you still have to get a straight up DNA match from the person. So they followed this fellow, this suspect, and he went to the Hobby Lobby. And they got a swab from his car door handle, touch DNA. And then at his house, they went into his trash can and they got a tissue. So they had 2 sources of DNA to compare to the original Night Stalker / East Area Rapist. And it was a match. And who was that person, Zach?
Joseph James DAngelo.
Joseph James DAngelo. And what do we know about Mr. DAngelo?
Well, let me tell everybody, including yourself, a little about this crazy SOB. He was born in 1945. He was born in Bath, New York. His father, which is also named Joseph DAngelo, was a pilot in the Air Force, and he served in World War II. His mother was named Caroline Grote, and she was a waitress at IHOP. I'm sorry, not Denny's. My mistake. Denny's.
Well, that's, you know, pretty close.
Pretty close, pretty close. His parents divorced not long after he was, I think he was about a toddler when they divorced. Now, what I want to explain to everybody about when there's a recently caught serial killer, most of the time when we have a lot of information about this individual, it's because this person can't shut up about themselves. In rare cases, in some cases, there are individuals, including Mr. DAngelo, that's not talking. Now, there are, in certain cases, able to look into public record stuff that he can't really, you know, we can find out for ourselves. But there aren't a lot of stuff about his childhood, but there are some. Meaning at one of the crime scenes, they had a thing, the police had something called the homework evidence. It was a letter at a crime scene. Well, parts of the letter said that one part of the letter in particular said, "Mad is the word that reminds me of the 6th grade. I hated that year." So, and then another part says, "It wasn't fair to make me suffer like that. I cried because I was ashamed. I will always be ashamed of the 6th grade forever." Now, a lot of people think this is an insight to, you know, him as a child. You know, he was humiliated as a kid and stuff. Maybe that's where a lot of anger comes from. But a lot of people also think it's a red herring because he's known for that. He's known to throw people off. So that's up for interpretation. But that kind of gives us a slight glimpse of him, I guess, as a child.
And it's interesting that you point that out, too, the 6th grade letter, because remember when I was saying earlier that he liked to throw the cops off? There were things that he did as the East Area Rapist that at first they thought was very insightful. But later they began to wonder if it wasn't an act that he was putting on. Like, you know, he would be raping these people, and then he would talk about, "Mommy, Mommy, I'm sorry I did this, Mommy." And so it made him look like he was a total nut job, which, I mean, he is. But it made him look like he was more insane than he was smart.
Well, and he would also, he loved to, like, you know, he'd tell a victim, you know, "You better not tell the police about my van outside." He never had a van. So, of course, the victim's going to tell the police, you know, he has a van. No, he doesn't. And he'd also tell the victims, you know, talk about pigs, you know, referring to cops as pigs, knowing that, which is something I'm about to go into a little bit, which is funny. He did it as to throw the victims off, because only criminals and stuff refer to cops as pigs, people who don't like the, you know, police. So, but yes, he loved to throw the police off, and he loved to throw his victims off. He loved to mess with anyone he possibly could.
Yeah, yeah. That's why I say I think he was a pretty cunning guy, you know, more cunning than he was inside. You can't prepare the way that he prepared and be a total raving lunatic.
Well, and there's a reason for. I mean, there's uh, he went to Folsom High School in Sacramento, California. But then after high school, he went to California State University in Sacramento, where he earned a degree in criminal justice. And this is where he learned a lot of this, way to, he learned the justice system this way. He learned to manipulate it. He learned to plant clues, all this stuff. And and then after he graduated, he went into the Navy, where he served in the Vietnam War. And when he got out, he signed up for the police department. Well, not to go into a lot of, well, at this time, there was a lot of home invasions and people breaking into windows and stuff. Well, the police said it was one man, and they dubbed him the ransacker.
Yes, the Visalia ransacker.
Yes, yes. Now, the reason why I'm mentioning this is because while he was a police officer, he was arrested for shoplifting various different objects. One of them was bear mace. One of them was rope. One of them was like tape, like duct tape and stuff. And it's funny because, like, you see these items and you're like, really? Like, how more obvious can you be, But
yeah. Yeah, anytime someone buys bear mace, you have to wonder about
it. No, seriously. But the police, they didn't look into that at all. They didn't look into what he was stealing. But the fact that he was caught shoplifting and stuff, he was in trouble. He was fired from the police department. Well, yes. And at this time, this was in the late 60s, he got, he was engaged to a woman named Bonnie Coldwell. Well, they were together for a while, but Bonnie broke off the engagement. Didn't really say why. Not too many people knew why. All that was reported about it was when a relative of her was asked, I think it was her brother, asked why did she leave him? All she said was she had plenty of good reasons. I guess some people say that he was really abusive and he was mean. He was an alcoholic. But one victim reported that as she was blinded. She had she had a blindfold around her eyes and she was gagged. And she remembered hearing him actually muttering to himself, "I hate you, Bonnie. I hate you, Bonnie. I hate you, Bonnie." So a lot of people think that her breaking off that engagement really set him off and really just kind of screwed something up in his head. And so kind of by 1973, so we're going to a few years later now, he actually got married to a woman named Sharon Marie Holt. Now, they had 3 daughters together.
Wow.
And he started to kill less and less. He wasn't killing anymore. And he had his 4th daughter by 1986. And that's when the killing stopped. And a lot of people think that he couldn't separate that anymore from his life. Now, his wife eventually left him. She divorced him because she reported that he was crazy, that he would sit outside and yell, he threatened their neighbors. Like he left a voicemail on his neighbor's phone saying, "I'm going to kill you and your whole family." And when the neighbor was like, "What the hell's wrong with you, dude?" And he went to confront him. And Mr. DAngelo was like, "Yeah, I did leave that message. Your dog won't stop barking."
Well, that's that's normal.
Yeah, totally, right? So the wife couldn't deal with a lot of this. She said he was an alcoholic. So she took off with, and so by the time he was caught, his kids were all grown up, obviously. His wife was gone. But yeah, apparently he was crazy. He would sit outside and yell, like, "I'm going to kill you." there was no one there. You know, he had, which I hear these things and I have a hard time believing some of them just because of how smart and intelligent and organized his crimes are. That's not coming from a guy that's just, you know, wiping, you know, shit on the walls and muttering to himself. You know, that takes intelligence.
Yeah. Well, you know, I have a certain opinion about. I mean, yeah, he was 72 years old when he was caught. He's 73 now. And
Yeah.
if you've seen any footage of Mr. DAngelo in being arraigned and stuff, you know, he's standing there like he's a vegetable.
Oh God, yes.
And here's my thing. Just before he got arrested, his ass is going to Hobby Lobby. He's calling up the neighbor about the barking dog. Look, and now all of a sudden, drooling in court. I don't buy it. Like, I just don't buy it. You know what I mean?
Yeah, it's such bullshit, man.
Yeah, there's no way I buy that this guy is as incapacitated suddenly as he is. His arrest suddenly made him into a convalescent, which I find a little strange. I think he knows from being a cop that you probably, if you're a rapist and you're of note, as he is, in terms of having sensationalized news coverage around you, and you've gotten away this long and people are paying attention to you, you're going to go to prison and you're going to get fucked up. And he's probably not trying to go to prison, so he wants to go to some hospital somewhere. So all of a sudden, he's, you know, he's the Walking Dead, right? But I don't buy it. I don't buy it at all. You know, I think this guy, he might have some memory issues from being a 73-year-old man, but I don't think he is as incapacitated as he likes to put himself off as being. I think he knows pretty much what he's doing. You know what I mean?
I've been following serial killers my whole life. You know, I've been fascinated by them. I've watched so many court cases throughout my life of serial killers and stuff. And one thing is, you could be sitting on death row for a while. Let's really do the math here. As old as he is, he's not going to be executed. And I don't even know if I think the death penalty in California is abolished. I could be wrong. I don't know, but
yeah, I'm not sure. I don't think they have a death penalty.
But even if they did, he's not. I mean, Richard Ramirez was way younger than him, and he died of, you know, on death row. I mean, it's just, he's way too old, and he's not gonna survive, you know, in prison. And it's just, so either way you look at it, you know, he's gonna. I don't mean to say it sounds so crude, but he's gonna die in a fucking hospital, or he's gonna die in on death row, you know, or in prison, because as old as he is, he's not gonna last long.
And it's interesting that you mentioned the Visalia ransacker, because those crimes went back even before the East Area Rapist. And we know that DAngelo has been tied because he's actually been charged with a murder that they think the Visalia ransacker committed. This was even before the East Area Rapes, a guy named Claude Schelling, or Schnelling, I think, actually, because this Claude Schnelling guy was in his bed one night, and he hears this commotion downstairs. He goes downstairs. He finds a masked man trying to drag a 16-year-old daughter out of the house, kidnap her.
Oh,
and
geez.
he says, "What the fuck are you doing?" And the guy pulls a gun, shoots him dead, and runs away. Now, the cops are pretty sure that was the Visalia ransacker, and DAngelo has been charged with that crime. So we can pretty much officially tie him to the ransacker crimes that happened before the East Area Rapist. And if you do that, then you can definitely see the escalation of things, because the ransacker was just a guy that broke into people's houses. You know, this is before he killed Mr. Schnelling. But before that, he was just a guy that broke into houses, and he'd just take little, you know, piddly things like a coin or one earring from a woman's, not both earrings, just little things that you would notice were missing. So you kind of go back to that, and yeah, he's just going to take like the batteries out of the remote. You know, you'll just be sitting there and you're trying to click the thing and it doesn't work. And you're like, "What's that? The Visalia ransacker must have been here." But yeah, I mean, that went on for several years, because that started back in '74, and the East Area Rape started in '76. So he was already, breaking into houses and stuff. So you go from this idea of breaking into somebody's house or just watching them through the window, and you escalate that into the East Area rapes, and then you escalate that even further into the murders of the original Night Stalker. And then you take all of this and put it under the umbrella term of the Golden State Killer, which is what he's called now that they've linked them all together. You don't want to call the same guy 3 different names. So now he's just the Golden State Killer. But the Golden State Killer actually was originally was 3 different people who were not tied together. And so they took the original Night Stalker, tied him to the East Area Rapist through DNA, and now they're able to tie the same guy to these ransacker crimes from the early 70s. So this guy's been busy for many, many years. And another reason why I really hope that he gets it in prison, because he got away with this for a long time. And he hurt a lot of people and killed a lot of people. And not only did he just kill them, but he violated them in the worst way and terrified them before he murdered them, and murdered them brutally. I mean, this guy he didn't just slit a throat or shoot somebody. He bashed their brains in he beat them to death. He's crushed their skulls. This is not a guy I have any sympathy for, whether he's drooling or otherwise. And I don't care if he's 80, if he's 90, or he's 100. I really hope that this DAngelo, gets put through the ringer.
He's a monster. And honestly, and chances are they're going to isolate him. But isolation or not, it's going to happen. People in prison have ways of doing stuff, so I don't think that he's going to live very long.
Yeah. Yeah. And even if he is in isolation and they have him in the hole the rest of the time, what's he going to live? Like maybe 10 more years, maybe? Yeah. So unfortunately, he didn't get caught earlier, but, he evaded capture a long time. Thank goodness for DNA, because that finally put a capper on this thing. And it also opened up the hope of other impossibly, cases that seemed impossible to solve actually maybe being solved. Who knows? Because you have
who the Zodiac is.
You might know who the Zodiac is. You might know who a lot of these other people are, because back then they weren't thinking about leaving their DNA. And now we can touch DNA is amazing. You can touch something and leave your DNA on it. You can it's so hard to evade capture nowadays if you're one of these people, because you can just breathe on something and they got you. I just hope that they wrap up some more of these cases, and I'm very glad that Joseph DAngelo is wherever he is, and I hope he stays there for a very long time. But anyway, that was the Golden State Killers case in a nutshell. Now, obviously, we had to go through that pretty fast because it's just an hour show, and there's a lot of things you could go into. We're going to try and do these true crime type shows pretty regularly, since those are the kind of shows that you guys tend to like. So there'll be some more of these sorts of shows coming up that we have planned. But that is about all we have today on the Golden State Killer. It was a fascinating, if not brief, journey, Zach, that we took today. But unlike a lot of these true crime cases, this one actually had a conclusion, which you don't always get.
Yeah, that's true. And but it's, some horror stories, some true horror stories can have a happy ending, at the end. And I don't think police ever thought that he'd be captured. So I think that, that's a good thing.
Yeah, for sure. For sure. Well, Zach, I had a good time today. Did you enjoy our first show back after a month's hiatus?
Oh, man, it was killer.
And we'll have a lot more coming your way very soon. So stay tuned to the weekly updates of LC Holt. Well, Zach, thanks again for being on the show.
Thanks for having me.
My pleasure. And thank you guys for watching. And until next week, take care of yourselves.